I don't know what we're doing, but it's great. Begin with the roast. Just start off strong.
We say this every time. Your whole plate just stepped over one second.
Oh.
I don't want to name names, but I'm for sure, you know,
Clint.
Sticks in my craw, as they say. My craw.
This is the oldest sounding episode of our lives. Sticks in my craw. Okay.
It had me spitting nickels.
The show is Table for Deuce, where we shoot the shit about all things lit. Welcome, everybody. With me, as always, is Kate, author extraordinaire, and we're doing roasty bios, which I haven't done in a long time. But Kate is basically the literary world's answer to H.P. Lovecraft. She is a cosmic horror and poet, mom, spouse, worker, editor, everything you could think of, all rolled up into a big tentacled mass. Welcome, everybody. Kate.
I feel so thank you. And every time you say welcome, everybody, I look around to like my cat or my empty bedroom. All right. Well, then, I am here with Michael Schmeltzer. Michael has written books. And you can find his poems in numerous journals worldwide.
Hooray.
You can also find Michael's name on the newly unsealed documents of Epstein Associates.
Oh, no. We're excited to do this again, excited to talk about poetry and just general lit world things. I'm not really in the lit world as much as I used to be, so I don't know what people are even talking about anymore, to be honest. I'm sure they're complaining about submission fees and how everything should be free, but also writers should get paid somehow magically. Just fucking money trees just pouring down money on writers. I have a hot take. Spend more money. Spend more money on things not AWP. That's my hot take for you.
That was your hot take last time.
I'm going to keep doing that every time.
Your hot take
is getting like people don't listen.
Tepid.
The funny thing, that plagiarism, that one person who is just plagiarizing like whole entire journals and identities, that made me laugh a little bit. Like, not going to lie.
That was hilarious. I thought, I mean, seriously.
It's just so blatant.
Yeah.
It is just the audacity of like stealing not just a poem, like just whole entire like libraries of work. Basically, I'm like, this is performance art.
Whenever something like this happens, I always have that hope that it's just like Andy Kaufman coming back and being like, I wasn't dead. I've been alive this whole time. I just got bored and decided to troll the poets. Like I said, a little part of me hopes that this person, I forget his name, I think he has like 4 names. Who cares? But the point is that I think, you know, if somebody was just like, I bet I could steal a whole journal and publish it under my name, and it would take people like 6 months to notice.
Who knows?
I know.
But no, it is really, there is something just strange about the whole entire thing. And it just, like you said, here is a person with 4 different names who is stealing entire journals, and and weirdly enough, like succeeding very well, apparently getting paid. And it's so bizarre to me. It's just such a bizarre thing to kind of witness. And I don't know, there's just no real accountability in the poetry world. I don't think he or she or they will just change to their name and probably do it again. There's 10 billion poems online to steal if you really wanted to. We do not like plagiarism. Let's just get that out there right now.
Just disclaimer, we do not like plagiarism. Unless it's funny, and if it seems like you're like Andy Kaufman trolling poet coming back from then that's fine.
Yeah, we are pro shenanigans, anti-plagiarism.
I'm excited about today. We're going to shift gears big time from the last show. So let's do it. Let's
Let's do it. Let us do the portion that I'm always most excited about, the toaster roast. And today's poem, I believe you will be reading for us, correct?
Yeah, this is Bree Rolfe. She it's funny, I went to Bennington. I got my MFA at Bennington, and I went she was there too at kind of at the same time. I didn't really get to know her there very well. But since then I've, been reading a lot of her work, and so she has this book that came out in 2021 called Who is Going to Love the Dying Girl? And the poem that I chose for us to read was published in the Coachella Review, I believe in 2017, in the waiting room of the Dell Children's Hospital CF clinic at age 40. The Disney Princess pictures and Finding Nemo posters haphazardly tacked up at registration cubicles where nurses wearing cartoon scrubs remind you of the fact that you are supposed to be dead now. Even your medicine reeks of childhood. Asian hamsters. Imagine a tiny syringe extracting secretions from their genetically engineered ovaries. Remember that fragile hamster you owned for 3 days? It caught cold and died. So many dead hamsters, their tiny bodies cooling off, water removed from flame. But that one death, you cried more than all the others, not because you knew it best. You loved it best because it was the most beautiful. Is there some kind of strange beauty in slowly dying of a child's disease, but not knowing until decades later? You never got out of gym class or made a wish or topped the other girls' sob stories at Annie Katz's sleepover when they kept playing Richard Marx's Hold On to the Nights and crying. How do we explain something that took us by surprise? Now you can't remember if you had nothing to share because you're not really a joiner, or because you walked in late and they were already crying. You know, I love this book. Um, her overall the book that this poem is in the collection. Um,
Mhm,
it's definitely on this theme of sort of facing your own mortality in the face of, a life-threatening illness, in this case, cystic fibrosis. And one thing that I read about Bree that I thought was interesting is before she turned to poetry, she was actually a music journalist for like, I don't know, a bunch of years. Um, and I thought that was interesting because if you do read this book, and I won't talk too much about the collection as a whole, but there is like a lot of these musical references as this continuous thread that goes throughout the collection. Um, and I, uh, it got me thinking a lot about sort of pop culture and poetry,
mhm,
and how this particular poem also has these references, like the Disney princess, the Finding Nemo,
mhm,
and obviously that Richard Marx song and everything. These sort of little timestamps, I guess you could say, on the poem that's sort of put it contextualizes how old she is. I mean, obviously she says it in the title, but it contextualizes
mhm,
what that feels like. And I don't think we talk enough about how pop culture influences our lives and how it can work in our writing. Like pop culture can be, I guess, alienating for some people, like if you make a reference that they can't identify with. But in other ways, pop culture can sort of bottle that nostalgia, a little bit,
mhm,
that people can relate to, of how these certain cultural things that happen around us imprint us. This collection as a whole talks a lot about pop culture, a lot about music. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of discuss that part about it a little bit. I'm interested in what you think, because I think I remember you saying in
mhm.
the past um, that you tend to like avoid. We talked about, there was like a Romeo and Juliet poem we talked about that referenced Romeo and Juliet,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
movie,
yeah.
and not the play, the movie, and how that was so different, what
Mhm,
it brought to the table by bringing up these sort of pop culture things. And and it's hard. I personally av-
Mhm.
avoid it, and not because I don't like it, only because I don't think I have the skill to 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 do it. I think other people might avoid it because it seems maybe anti-academic,
Mhm.
or like lowbrow or something, to
Yeah.
these anti-intellectual references that are just part of our sort of uh very superficial culture. The way she incorporates music into her poems, it kind of reminded me of like the way we used to make mixtapes for each other. And that we became these sort of curators of like feeling and just sort of contextualizing ourselves within these different type, like the choice, not even just the choice of song or artist, but the
Mhm.
transition from one song to I mean, I don't know if you did this, but I did it like crazy all the time.
Yeah.
And just in a romantic way for like a boyfriend.
Mhm.
Me and my sisters used to make mixes for each other all the time. And I don't know. So it kind of reminded me of that. It's like this particular song, in this moment in time of my life, and or this particular moment of sitting in the hospital looking at these posters and kind of just where it puts me on the map.
Yeah, I think so. Like I don't tend to use a lot of pop culture in my own writing, and it's not that I'm not a giant consumer of pop culture, or I don't think of it as like less than in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I love kind of these references in this poem too, as far as there's something kind of community oriented about it in a way that can make it accessible to someone that might not be into poetry, let's say, but is into different things as far as music or whatnot. And they're basically these little openings in this poem that allow someone who might not be completely involved in poetry or the poetry world, but they're involved in different things. And like Richard Marx, specifically that song "Hold On to the Nights" is such a like you said, it's a timestamp. I mean, I don't know anyone who still listens to Richard Marx, but I think a lot of people used to listen to at least one song by Richard Marx. So things like that definitely, like you said, has that nostalgia factor, and it kind of brings us back to a certain time period, especially people of a certain age. And then, of course, like Disney princesses and Finding Nemo, all that's pretty relatively. Um, I mean, Disney has been around for a long time, so these things are kind of common cultural, like kind of touchstones. So I do think there's something to be said about using that and using it well. I think this poem in particular uses it in a way that creates a setting, and it's not necessarily about pop culture, but it does put you in this, like you said, in this kind of time and space. And it really, I think, works effectively. And I don't know if I could do a poem that well using pop culture. I would love to be able to, because there are so many interests that I have that are outside of poetry that don't tend to get written about, which is like the video game episode we did. Like I would love to be able to write about video games more effectively in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if I could, but I would love to be able to do that. Um, and just yeah, I really like the poem for being able to do that as far as bringing these things in without making it about those things, but also placing it in the poem effectively and having it be part of this whole kind of unified picture of what is happening or where the speaker is. So yeah, I did enjoy that a lot. The idea of this like kind of like sleepover setting or whatever it is with that song and the kids crying and it just like it really does put this concrete image in my head that is so effective.
Well,
So
I think pop culture and memory are so connected that I thought the same thing. There was, the Richard Marx song, uh, it's like oceans apart. I used to sing that on the bus with my friend every day on the way to school, and we would belt it. So there is this kind of weird nostalgia, and it's kind of like, the smell of cut grass. There's just this weird, like there's so many different things that invoke memories and emotion. It doesn't just put us contextually in this speaker's world. I think it also helps us understand a sense of like how pop culture, like the references of pop culture also invoke like a deep loneliness. And I think that it has to do with the fact that this is an adult, a 40-year-old woman who
Mhm.
is, in a cystic fibrosis children's hospital, looking at these pop culture references that in her, in this particular instance,
Mhm.
don't particularly fit in her life situation. And much like having, like the speaker when it says, of course, because my printout is messed up that I probably won't find it, but is there some kind of strange beauty in slowly dying
Mhm.
of a child's disease? I think a strange beauty and also a very strange loneliness. And that's so uh poignant, I think, in these references, looking, sitting as a grown woman in that kind of situation, looking around at the cartoons and the references and stuff and
Mhm.
feeling like this isn't like I don't belong here. I know how it's almost kind of funny. Like I like the personality behind this poem where it's not like irreverent, but just kind
Mhm.
of remarking on the absurdity of it all, that to be in this situation is just kind of messed up. It's not your normal textbook s- or how we understand this particular illness and how it affects,
Mhm.
people generally speaking. I definitely felt something about these different things, and maybe it's just because I'm the same age. I think we're generally the same age. Um,
Mhm.
that and being kind of in a particular point of my life where it is so much nostalgia driven, and I think that I was impressed. I think that using these different images to really give, at least for me, I got that major sense of isolation, loneliness, something really sad about it. We could get into there's, some of this other stuff like the hamsters. Uh,
Mhm.
it 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 kind of loses me just a little bit there. Yeah, remember that fragile hamster you owned for 3 days? It caught cold and died. So many dead hamsters, their tiny bodies cooling off, water removed from flame. But that one death, you cried more than the others. Not because, and this is where it's, yeah, not because you knew it best, you loved it best. It was the
Mhm.
most beautiful. And then the way that it sort of that part kind of lost me a little bit
Mhm.
until it got brought back around, where it was just like, you can't remember, how do we explain something that took us by surprise? And that just that line of, you can't remember you can't remember if you had nothing to share because you're not really a joiner, or because you walked in late and they were already crying. I guess I think about like being a kid and going
Mhm.
to a sleepover and showing up late, and they, or they say they're already there and they're already listening to this song and they were already touched by so much
Yeah.
emotion, and they're of a certain age. I'm thinking here it's probably like preteen sort of era. And
Mhm.
you walk in and they're already taken, so taken by a moment, and you're outside of it. In those situations, as a kid, it's like, oh god, like it could be so and using that image, that particular childhood moment of being like at a sleepover, everyone's there, they're taken over by emotion, but you showed up too late. And I feel like
Mhm.
she's kind of giving this, a feeling of, I'm always showing up too late to my own narrative.
Mhm.
That this is a childhood's disease. And here I am,
Mhm.
40 years old, sitting in the waiting room, that it's just this kind of, I'm a foreigner in my own life.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. There is, like you said, there is that kind of outsider perspective, even though it's the author's own story or the speaker's own story about the illness and things like that. But I there are a couple things that feel like warm up to me a little bit. Even though I do like the references to the like Disney princesses, especially in context with the idea of the that line that I really do love, and I think that's kind of where the poem takes off. That is there some kind of strange beauty in slowly dying of a child's disease, but not knowing until decades later? I think that is almost like a Disney princess type of like narrative where there is some kind of curse or some kind of disease or some kind of whatever that is with the main character, let's say. So I do like that tie-in, and I do like that all but the first few paragraphs, if you want to call them that, because the form is so kind of interesting. It just feels like it's kind of more like just kind of like I said, it's more like a warm-up, and including the hamster portion, it feels like it's a little bit of a warm-up. I feel like the poem for me really begins with the line, but that one death, you cried more than all the others, not because you knew it best. You loved it best because it was the most beautiful. And there's something about that line that really strikes me. I like kind of the almost like the fickleness of that line. Like it's not even necessary that it's known best, but it's like people have these kind of attachments. And I wish it didn't necessarily explain because it was the most beautiful. I think there is something just lovely about this, just plain kids love things because they love it. And I would love a little bit more mystery there rather than the explanation, but I do think the poem kind of begins at that point for me. And yeah, but like you said, with the being late to your own narrative, I think is a beautiful way to put that. And I do find that sense of like kind of being the outsider and that loneliness, like you said, to be very effective in this poem.
Even though it is a bit strange, even your medicine reeks of childhood, which I totally I it's not that that is strange, it's just that it's like even your medicine reeks of childhood, colon, like, here's my example, Asian hamsters, like, so it's kind of like 2
Mhm,
images in one. It's like because when she says, "Even your medicine reeks of childhood," immediately I'm brought to, like, the smell of amoxicillin, like that pink stuff
mhm,
that is, like, so distinct. So that line to me, again,
mhm,
like, these things, these little stamps of memories in our lives that they're kind of, like, grotesque in like the medicine is gross, it smells gross.
mhm,
Hamsters smell terrible. But they're beautiful things too. Like it's like there's comfort there. And so like there is something to be said about the honesty here, I think, in putting these references down. That, not all of these little things that like these little pockets of memories that live within us that get invoked by smells or sounds or not all of them are just these beautiful Disney princesses. They are these other like kind of
mhm,
weird things that imprint on us. I don't know. It's there it does kind of go off a little bit, I think, before it refines itself again, when with that line of there's something strangely beautiful about, or is there some kind of strange beauty in knowing and slowly dying of a child's disease, but not knowing until decades later. And this line, I think,
mhm,
is not only a line that helps really imprinted that sentiment onto the reader, but I also feel like it gives us that information. Last time when we were talking about Vincent Rondoni's poem, I mentioned that I felt there was questions brought up, like, well,
mhm,
why do you feel compelled? Like, why were you taught to do these grand gestures of love? Whereas this particular line helps answer questions for me. If I didn't I mean, I do know a little bit about Bree's story, um,
mhm,
but I think it helps to understand, like, the context of what's happening here, of being an older person, dealing with a disease that is, historically deadly to children and sort of outliving those markers and having to
mhm,
kind of come to terms with what that must feel like. So it, it does kind of bring me back. It's like a little bit of a information anchor, I guess, to kind of understand contextually what's happening. Again, that just that last part about the, showing up and like and walking in late and they're already crying. It's almost like there's something there was something so chilling to me about that, to say, not just, what we said earlier about kind of showing up late to your own narrative, but there's
Mhm.
also something that was super chilling to me, to think like feeling as though maybe people are already on the or already in the process of mourning you, or in the process of
Mhm.
an acceptance of letting you go. And that, I don't know, that just, whew, I thought that was really impactful.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there's that kind of beautiful like sense of walking in on your own funeral
yes.
moment at the end there where it's like you were the person who has this illness and there's this basically a group of mourners in some sense. I want to point out the lines that I really thought um, kind of captured a certain sense of that kind of this is I don't want this to sound mean in any ways, but kind of a childlike selfishness or narcissism as far as the you never got out of gym class or made a wish or taught the other girls as sob stories at Annie Katz's sleepover. Like that I love as this kind of like practical slash like child perspective of like I have this thing and I didn't even benefit from it. Like there's this illness and there are like these perks that I could have had, basically perks if you want to call it that. But I mean, there are these things that the speaker never got, and I just think that is such a kind of honest, interesting kind of moment in the poem where I think there are things like that, and it's like like oh, we went to the Bahamas, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt type of moment. I have this childhood illness, and I never even got any of this other stuff, and I think that's a very honest, sincere moment.
Yeah, and it shows that there's, she definitely has a good sense of humor. It reminds me of kind of sort of table talk, the things that you're like, we could joke about being like, I never even got my make-a-wish. It's so inappropriate to say, but like, like
Yeah.
it's funny and it's true. And I love
Hmm.
bringing that honesty of just this sort of bitterness, and but also, I don't know, there's a little bit of an edge to it, kind of,
Hmm.
that I almost feel that it is said for the purpose of being kind of funny, as opposed to airing an actual grievance of being like, "And I never got my
Hmm.
a wish." Like, I didn't really
Yeah.
believe it was not that, like, a believable thing of being like, "Damn," you know,
Yeah.
"You're really mad." She does such a good job putting you in that room with her, and you
Hmm.
see it all, and it's almost like it's almost like a scene in a show, like, that we would see, some kind of like of a dramedy situation.
Yeah, and there's the scene in like multiple movies or shows that I've seen where it's like the protagonist will is still somehow going to their childhood dentist or their pediatrician from when they were a kid, and it's like this grown up surrounded by these childhood posters and like these cute little stuffed animals and things like that, and that I think works really well in this poem in the beginning. Like if this were told from the perspective of a child, the posters and all those things would be very different, I think, is what they conjure versus what an adult looks at. I mean, the adult is very aware of mortality in a way that maybe some children aren't. Even children who are dealing with diseases might not fully understand or comprehend per se mortality in the same way that an adult might. So you have that sense of here's a person who understands like what they're dealing with and their surroundings and what the surroundings are trying to do, but also what they're not fully accomplishing. Like there are no illusions for the speaker in the same way that there might be for children. And I just think it's a really interesting kind of, like you said, there is that humor in there. It's not like a laugh out loud type of humor, but there is that edge. There is that little bit of kind of self-awareness that um, comes across throughout the poem that I really, really enjoy.
Imagine what it might feel like to feel iced out by your own disease, that
Mhm.
you're kind of an outsider of your own sickness, and that is such a fascinating and unbelievable thing, to have to deal with. There's something about the specifics that I just really love here. I just love that it's, imagine taking these references out. Take out the Nemo, take out the
Mhm.
Disney princess, take out the Richard Marx, and just put a woman in a room at a cystic fibrosis clinic or hospital
Mhm.
for children and tell the same story. Would it be as effective as it is by invoking these smells and memories and sounds and music, to put that context and help us understand, like, the exact situation that's happening. I don't know if it would be as
Mhm.
successful of a poem for me.
I agree. I think the references are essential in the poem itself. I think was it Rolfe does a really good job of incorporating that um, without making the point pop culture. She uses pop culture, which I think is really a subtle skill. And pulling out the lyric from Richard Marx's song, the "How do we explain something that took us by surprise?" I mean, I would never think of Richard Marx as some kind of great lyricist, but recontextualizing a line like that and pulling it out and using it, and making me look at it brand new with fresh eyes, I think is impressive. I think that's a great tactic, and yeah, I really did enjoy the references, and it wasn't enough to like it, even if I didn't know the references, it wouldn't like keep me out of the poem. So I think that's what makes it really nice as well, is that it, like I said, they're openings, not closures. They're not a reference to make someone feel less than. They're references that are used as openings, I think, more than anything else. And I think it really just puts people where they need to be in the poem.
I think it also sort of, or for me at least, it reminds me that whatever is dominating a society, whatever's dominating society
Mhm.
at any given point in time, um, is impacting us in ways that we probably don't realize in the moment. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. When you use, like, when you're, poetry as an art, okay, could either be
Mhm.
resisting what's
Yeah.
happening, you know, um, or which I think we see all the time, just very
Mhm.
anti-consumerism, or
Mhm.
any of that, or like just capitalist culture, um, just doing whatever you can to go into a little bubble, and sort of intellectually draw yourself out of that
Mhm.
world. Whereas this is accepting it. It's keeping those things there because that part of our world is a part of us, whether it's anti-intellectual, anti-academic, or superficial,
Mhm.
doesn't have any deep emotional impact. I don't know. It's I guess I'm just impressed by Bree's ability to work these references in a way that I don't think I could. It's part of the show where, it's like when you're like that person at a restaurant with your empty plate and someone comes up and you're like, "I hated it." Like, it was
Exactly.
terrible. Like, I feel like I need to make that joke every time. Like, "I roast it." All that is to say,
I
uh,
said, no, thank you.
but, so I'll go on, just, this was my poem I picked, and I will, just, I feel like I already just said a whole bunch of stuff that really helps to explain my feelings on this poem, but I do toast it. It's, talk about a very difficult topic to read about and I'm sure, to write about. I find everything about this poem to be just devastatingly honest. The book in general, not that,
Mhm.
in this case, it's I just wanna plug one more time Who's Going to Love the Dying Girl. It's from Unsolicited Press, um, from 2021. It was published. Again, these references, like references pop culture, especially music. Like I said, that kind of mixtape feel, that
Mhm.
really it's kind of brings back those old school feelings of packaging up our, or just curating our feelings about certain things, using music, using those things to sort of tell a story for someone else. I think she does it really well. So I toast this poem, and I highly recommend the book as well.
I haven't read the book at all, but I do like the fact that it sounds like uh, she writes from a place of genuine interest and passion. And as far as like if she was a music journalist for a while and then is also writing about music in her own way through poetry and about her own life and all that stuff, I think there is something so not just admirable, but I think that's how you create authentic, like genuine moving pieces of art, is when you are able to kind of marry your various interests into this form. And I do think that does come across. I bet you if I read the book, it would probably come across that there is not just a story of the body and illness, but a story about music, and that kind of passion will probably come through, I imagine. The poem, when I first read it, like a long time ago, we had talked about reviewing this, and then we didn't get to it for a while. But when I first read it, I wasn't a big fan of the poem. There are a lot of little nitpicky things that I could go into about the poem. The spacing itself doesn't really do a whole lot for me. The spacing feels a little bit predictable and a little bit too spot on at times, as well as some of the line breaks feel a little bit too predictable and spot on. It it doesn't seem as surprising as I want it to be. And if you're talking about it kind of representing the posters itself being haphazardly tacked up, I would have loved a little more experimentation, a little more chaos in the way it was arranged. But those are pretty minor things in comparison to how effectively the poem deals with the topic of illness and being, like we've talked about, being that outsider within your own illness and within this location, within this clinic. The lines, like I don't think I'll ever get over the line, is there some kind of strange beauty in slowly dying of a child's disease? Like that line itself is so heartbreaking, and there is something strangely beautiful, I would say, about it. Not in the sense that like it's something to be celebrated, but there is something that I think is so tragic, and everyone should be much more keenly aware of these type of things. And I think there is a beauty to that, only in the sense that there is a beauty in witnessing. And I think she captures that in this poem very well, and just blends so many different things really well. And the ending just really, really knocks it out of the park for me. So whatever flaws I think the poem might have, I think is completely carried by just the other things that she managed to do so well. So I too toast this poem after sitting with it and rereading it in this discussion. It's just like it might have slipped in on the toast side, but like the more I think about it and the more I talk about it, it keeps going further and further down that toasty side. So I just gotta say I really did enjoy it, and I really like sitting with it. And I think I will definitely want to check out that book. So
I have an extra copy
yay.
somewhere in my book piles. So, but I think people should definitely go pick up a copy for themselves. It's interesting what you're saying about the form. I thought about that too. There is something super, that poets can do that's so predictable, in trying to use form to emulate. What I felt like in this case was maybe doing the work. The form is doing, I think, the work that the words aren't exactly doing, and sort of explaining what it might physically be like to have cystic fibrosis, and with creating these spaces for breath, and
Mhm,
pauses, and that might be an overread into it, or
mhm,
what, because we don't really know. There is a lot that we don't know about the state of like the speaker's health, or why they're at the clinic, or if it's just routine, or if it's like kind of more of an emergency. You don't really know, like there isn't a lot of details, and unless you are an expert on cystic fibrosis, which I'm not. I mean, I know like the basics, but
Mhm.
I do feel like form in this way is kind of doing that work of creating a labored, because in retrospect, this was something I kind of complained about, but retrospectively, as I go back to the top and have that sort of, opening line, I feel like it could be doing that work of showing the kind of labored way in which of having to explain what is happening. I don't know if I feel so strongly about it in this case. I think it just kind of works. I feel like if it talked more about labored breathing or things like that, that it would be maybe just
Mhm.
a little too much. I'm glad that you came around. I wasn't sure where you were going to land on this one.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure, but like the more I'm sticking with it, the more I like it. So that's generally a sign I will continue to enjoy it and find different things that I like. Kudos to Bree Rolfe for
Mhm.
that poem. That was excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent to think about, excellent to read, excellent to discuss. So nice choice. Nice choice, Kate.
Thank you. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts too on pop culture references in poetry. Specifically, I know this one has the the Disney in it, but specifically music, and not even
Mhm.
just like specifically music. It's like specifically music. I mean, we're talking Richard Marx. Like, who can put Richard Marx in a poem and like do it well?
Yeah,
That's pretty impressive to me. So I would love to hear more people's thoughts on that, where
yeah.
they, because I know for sure, for certain, there are people who hate this kind of thing. I do think people get so, it's like if you get too overcome with trying to be so overly over the top lyrical, when in fact you could use
Mhm.
a reference that is like of an actual song lyric, even though it's like a
Yeah.
cheesy 80s song, but that actually will invoke something in our like
Mhm.
inner selves, like our our own histories, that I think is similar, if not more impactful than a surprising
Mhm.
lyrically beautiful line.
Absolutely. And I think what Rolf does really well is instinctually just trusting her own references, not over explaining, not forcing a deeper meaning. They're just in there. And I think that is one of those instances where a writer could definitely screw that up. They're going to want to explain, they're going to want to like feel like the readers aren't going to catch it or aren't going to do enough work or it's not going to come across the way she wants. So she's going to add just one more line trying to make sure you get it. But I
Yeah.
think she just very, very like cleverly dodges that trap and just lets the lines be. And I think that is a skill that I don't see too much in pop culture references. I think she lets pop culture be pop culture. And I think sometimes if you're writing about pop culture, you want it to be so much more, which can work too. I've seen that done really well. But sometimes pop culture is pop culture. Sometimes Richard Marx can just sit and be Richard Marx. All right. And if anyone out there disagrees, if you hate Richard Marx, let us know at table4deuce@gmail.com. Tell us what you think about Richard Marx, really. We will read your opinions on air. That would be so
Yeah,
great.
the
I would
day
love it.
slowly go insane. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, brilliant, brilliant stuff right there. My
Huh.
gosh, just
That's
all right.
all right.
Well,
Well,
thank you. Thank you,
yeah,
everybody. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Bree Rolfe. That was awesome. What a great poem. What a good
yeah,
job. What a
yeah.
nice one.
A nice one. Good stuff.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your whatever it is you're doing, and we will catch you next time.
Till next time. Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
And end. There we go.
Every
Oh
time
man,
I realize at the end, I always go,
it's your signature move.
I don't
It was all fine until you just dropped the F-bomb.